too. Great. So hi, everybody. A lot of you are familiar names on my screen from every week at Sake School. So thanks for joining us for a very special edition, taking it to Zoom and a little virtual trip to Brooklyn. I'm going to take a tour and a tasting at Brooklyn Kura, which we're really excited about. I know a lot of you have had interest in domestic sake for a long time, so we're really excited to have the opportunity to introduce. With that said, I'm going to turn this over to my co-hosts and let them take it from here. If you need me, I'll be around. I'm going to sit back and drink, enjoy some sake.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Jesse Bronner. I work for Vine Connections. We import sake, and we also represent Brooklyn Kura here in California. I live in Los Angeles here. I've worked in restaurants most of my career and hopped over to the sake side of things last April. And shortly after, we picked up Brooklyn Kura, and we couldn't be happier. So thanks for tuning in, and we're so gracious to Brian for letting us into your home.
So thank you both. I mean, every time I go to LA, I have a great time because of both of you. Welcome, everyone. I mean, we do virtual tastings a lot more now than I would have ever expected. And one of the things that we try and achieve in those tastings is really to give you the sense that you're in the brewery with us. And so what I'm going to do is just give a quick overview about Brooklyn Kura, and then I'm going to switch to my phone. I'm going to walk you through our tap room and production process to give you a sense of the things we do on a daily basis to bring you the sake you have. Hopefully everyone in front of them has two sakes. The first sake is, I believe, our Blue Door, which is a Junmai sake, which we'll describe in more detail later. The second sake is Junmai Ginjo, our number 14. So don't wait for us to have a sip. I mean, I think the three of us are already drinking. So, so Brooklyn Kura, we're New York's first sake brewery. I mean, effectively, I fell in love with sake, which is not a difficult thing to do given its rich history, tradition, and like how wonderful it is. But we started the company in 2016. We really started commercially making sake in January of 2018. So we're a young company in a challenging time, trying to do our best to kind of maintain the integrity and quality of sake that we fell in love with from Japan, but producing it domestically. So our sakes are all Junmai style sakes, and really what that means is there are 4 ingredients. That's rice that we get from California and Arkansas, water that we source from the Catskills. Essentially, New York City is famous for its bagels and pizza, and ramen is fantastic here, and that's because the water is relatively soft and comparable in many respects in mineral content to the water you would find in Japan. We make our own koji, of course, but we source the tane, which is the mother koji, and we can talk a little bit more about koji as I go through our manufacturing process from Japan. And then our yeast, which is kind of one of the most interesting things about drinking our sake, because most of our sakes are really a study in different yeasts and yeast blends. We source from wherever we can get them. We steal them if necessary. So it's one of the more challenging things to get access to as a producer in this whole process. So to keep this a little bit more engaging, I'm going to transition to my phone. What I'd ask everyone to do is put questions into the chat, and Jesse or Courtney will kind of help moderate, and I'll make sure I address what you ask. If you feel like I'm rambling, feel free to write that too, and I'll just stop and we can start drinking. But give me 1 sec, all right?
While he's transitioning, just going to say everyone should have some snacks with them as well. We have a
Can you guys hear me?
cured salmon, and then a miso cream cheese to snack on while you're doing this.
All right, so yeah, so this is our tap room. Actually, we just reopened about a month ago. It is a place where we do a range of different things, from host Michelin star chefs to tastings to just, I mean, pretty much give people a familiar place to experience sake like they would experience beer or fine wine at a winery or a brewery. So what I'm doing right now is I'm walking into the back, and the back is where our production process happens. So we're a small brewery. Give me 1 second. I have to put on some boots. We are a small brewery. We produce anywhere between 2,500 and 5,000 cases a year. And our distribution is very limited. It's really New York and California, with California being a small piece of the puzzle. And we're also in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So we're slowly starting to expand that, I mean, with the help of Jesse and his team. So, like I mentioned, we make a Junmai style of sake. The sake process is relatively straightforward. It's a very linear process in that we get our rice from, as I mentioned, California and Arkansas, and that rice is already milled for us. So for those of you that know a lot about sake, I mean, milling matters to the extent that sake brewers' rice is used and is distinctive because the starch is centralized. And so the more you mill away from the grain, the more fats and proteins you're removing and the more pure starch of fermentation. So we get milled rice. Actually, the rice, I have some out right now to show you. This is Calrose. You can kind of see it here. This is milled to 60%, all right? And that saves us a bunch of infrastructure costs. So after milling the rice, what we do is we need to rinse it. So for those of you who cook at home, I'm sure you're very familiar with the fact that when you're making rice, you should rinse it to remove residual rice flour and to prevent from like clumping when you're actually steaming it. And so we do the same. This is one of our only pieces of Japanese equipment. It is our rice washer. It does about 15 kilograms of rice per batch. And our batches have about 500 kilograms of rice in them and yield about 1,000 liters of sake. After rinsing, we soak the rice in these tubs in a very traditional process with filtered water. And the soaking process is really intended to hit very specific moisture content levels for like downstream applications. So you'll soak koji rice to different moisture content than you would kakamai, which is the main rice edition. And if I'm saying things that are a little bit more advanced than they need to be, just feel free to ask a question for clarification later. So this is our steamer. So after rinsing and soaking, we steam. This is a clean injection steamer that we got from like Cleveland. We had this steamer, the actual barrel, built in Brooklyn, and it can handle about 300 kilograms of rice at a time. After steaming, we use pretty much this floor space and some cooling aids to bring the steamed rice temperature down to temperatures that are going to be very important for like the next stages. And the next stage, and I'm going to walk you into this room, which we doubles as storage and has a bin pasteurizer sitting in front of me. This is our koji room, okay? This table was built by a very talented artisan that's actually shares a building with us. And what we do here, I mentioned those 4 ingredients. So rice becomes koji, and koji represents about 20% of our batches. And essentially what you're doing is you're taking steamed rice, you're spreading it over this surface, you're propagating a mold onto that rice. And that mold is a miracle ingredient used in soy, in miso and shochu, and effectively what it's doing is as it's growing, it's producing enzymes. And those enzymes, what they do is they break down starches to sugars and proteins to amino acids. And because rice doesn't have sugar in it, and yeast need sugar to consume to produce alcohol esters and the wonderful things that we expect out of our sakes and wines and beers, you need a mechanism like koji to introduce the sugar. So this table's on weights, as you can see up there, and the design is really for us to know from the point of entry of the steamed rice to the point at which to the point at which we have koji. We can monitor how the koji is progressing. We can do it visually. We can do it through some technology aids, but more importantly, we do it by weighing it and seeing how much moisture is leaving the system as the koji is growing. So after koji making, we take other steamed rice and we come into this space, which is our primary fermentation area, but it acts as many other things.
Hey, Brian,
What's up?
Are you able to switch your phone to horizontal view?
Yeah, if that's cool. Does that look better?
Yeah, now we can see it even better. Thank you.
All right, no problem, Jesse. Sorry about that. So what we have here, so let's start with the other ingredient that's like very, very important in the process. So this is our water kind of area. And effectively what we're doing is we're taking New York City tap water, we're removing any particles that are kind of about from the legacy infrastructure. We're passing the water through a green sand filter, which removes iron and manganese, which is not good for sake fermentation or for the aging of sake. Then we have a traditional charcoal filter to kind of get everything else out of it, including chlorine. And then we chill our water in this tank, a mizu tank, to very specific temperatures as we're building up the fermentation. I'm gonna walk over here with you guys to show you these large cylindrical silver things are our fermentation vessels. And some of them have sake in them. Let's see actually if this one does. It'd be hilarious if it doesn't. Actually it does. I think I need to stir this after the call. But yeah, I mean, you kind of see what is about a 1,500 liter batch of sake. This was just put together this week and will be vigorously bubbling by tomorrow. So let's go linearly. So we made koji and we take other steam rice, water, and yeast, and we slowly build up our fermentation in these large cylindrical vessels. After fermentation is done, we use this machine, this like accordion press. It's actually called a bladder press. It's commonly used in beer making, but also in like CBD and oil manufacturing. There's like so many applications of these mash filter presses. And we use it kind of in the spirit of a traditional machine in Japanese sake brewing called a yabuta. And essentially it's an accordion press. The fermentation mash comes in through here, and then with about 60 pounds of pressure is forced through this filter material, and what comes out of here is clear sake. And then that clear sake, what we do is we take other steps to filter it and stabilize it and put it in the bottles that you guys have in front of you. So I tried to do that quickly. Let me walk back to my computer and I can field some questions. I guess one thing before we go, we produce a bunch of different sakes. What you have in front of us are kind of our classics and what kind of we sell a great deal of. But everything from Kimotos to our Daiginjo, to things like what we just released, this Grand Prairie, all Yamada sake, all of which are designed to kind of be traditional in nature, but have the very distinctive flair of producers in Brooklyn. All right, give me 1 second, all right, guys? Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds great. No echo.
Cool. How was that? Any questions?
That was great. Yeah, so far, can you talk about the types of yeast you brew with, and maybe we can get into the specific ones from each sake as we taste?
Yeah, so I mean, among the things that we field questions almost every day from prospective brewers, from people interested in importing sake, distributing it, or making sake domestically. The one thing that we really don't talk a lot about is our yeast. And the reality is because it's so challenging for us to procure the yeast, and the channels that we use to get access to it are usually channels that ask us to maintain confidence. What I can say is we have a range of different yeasts. Yeast that we get from Jozo, which is like the kind of Japanese yeast and clearinghouse. I mean, they do a bunch more than that. We get yeast from a place called Akita Kono, which will retail yeast to non-Japanese producers. And then the yeasts that we use for our sakes are really fit for purpose, right? The number 14, which is your second sake in front of you, has a much more floral and aromatic quality and is a blend of yeasts. One is a traditional ginjo yeast, and really our goal was to make something that was very similar to a namazake you would get at one of the best breweries in Japan. In the first sake we use a blend of yeast as well, but there the goal is more subdued aromatics and a little bit more focus and heat and savory qualities. And so we'll taste those things when we taste the sake. I can't hear you, Jesse.
Do you use your kasu for anything? And are you trying to replicate the water used in Japan, or are you just trying to make the best of Brooklyn water?
I mean, we don't have to just make the best of Brooklyn water. Brooklyn water is fantastic. So, so we could replicate the water used in Japan, but we don't see any purpose in it at all. And actually, that's one of the things as we get, I mean, pre-COVID, we were getting visitors from Japan and Japanese breweries all the time. And that was one of the questions, like, how can you make sake in a big industrial city like New York? And then they taste the water, they see the mineral composition of the water, and they taste the sake, and they're like, fuck, I mean, okay. So do we use our kasu? Yes, we would like to use our kasu in its entirety. Right now, what we do is we have some fantastic restaurant partners that use from Blue Hill, like from fancy restaurants to that have multiple Michelin stars, to like your corner ramen shop that use our kasu for a range of different purposes, from pickling to other fermentation exercises, whether it's vinegar making or whatever, to just making a more savory kind of like textured ramen broth. So the answer is yes. We will be making shochu with our kasu, and we have in the past, which has worked out really well. So yeah, we want to be zero waste when it comes to our fermentation process.
Any reason why the source of the yeast is anonymous?
So in Japan, the yeast, from our experience, has been relatively protected. And so there are certain yeasts that the Japanese government has not been excited about seeing them leave Japan. And so just as a general, even though we of course do not use any of those restricted yeasts, as a general rule, we remain pretty silent. Like, I mean, I'll give you an example of a yeast that we do talk about. So we use 1401 in our Grand Prairie, our all Yamada Junmai Genjo. And that's because the process of getting that yeast was relatively easy and directly with the government. I think I mean, as people who operate in the business community in Japan, try to be very respectful of the wishes of our suppliers in that regard. So we are.
Have you coordinated with breweries with your yeast? If not, who are your most common collaborators?
We've been so lucky; it's ridiculous. So I mean, let's go from the least expected, most exciting, to kind of the more common to the less frequent. So least expected, most excited. I mean, we get visited from Japanese breweries like pre-COVID, like every week, and those are brewers and brewery owners, etc. And so a lot of those yield a form of collaboration. So the most significant of which was our first daiginjo we made with one of the best sake breweries in Japan, with Nambu Bijin, right? So which is they make beautiful sake. It's award-winning sake. It's very traditional in profile and form. And they sent their two master brewers, their master toji, to come brew a batch of daigincho with us in our like little, I don't know what the word ratchet means, but I think it should be appropriate here in our small kind of humble brewery. Um, and and so that's on the extreme, and that's part of the support and encouragement we received from Japan and the Japanese industry, the brewing industry, that we didn't expect. Yeah, the ginjo is sold out, actually both versions of it. So we have another batch that's coming through and should be ready in the next maybe month or two, because we do let it sit after pasteurization for a while. So then our more common collaborations are all with chefs, whether it be, like I mentioned, Blue Hill with our kasu, or it be Odo with our sake and our koji, or it be Xalis. Like these are New York restaurants that are extraordinary and like super into fermentation, and we do regular collaborations with them, whether it's like a dessert that they make, or they come and they do a presentation of food in our tap room, etc. I mean, of course, there's less of that happening right now, because restaurant industry in New York is having a challenging time, as many places, but it's a more common thing that we do. The less frequent thing that we do that's equally exciting is we get to partner with beer breweries and distillers, right? We do collaborations with everyone from like Brooklyn Brewery and Big Alice in Long Island to more kind of obscure, like small batch producers that are interested in kind of like specific eccentric part of our process. And most of that collaboration work is not like an economic exercise. It's really just like cool people that are doing something interesting and say, fuck it, can we do this together? Would you be interested in doing it together? And just making it work. So yeah, we do quite a few collaborations.
Should we get into some tasting?
Let's do it. Do you want to do it, Jesse? Why don't you do the tasting?
I gave my last two sakes to Courtney a few days ago, but I am drinking a little bottle of your Komodo that you get to test.
All right, that's fantastic. So you guys should have two sakes in front of you. Number one is our Blue Door Junmai sake. That's what it looks like in its package. I don't know why it's communicating as purple on Zoom, but the color's corrupted. And this sake, I'm going to open it here. And can second this, oh, nice. This salmon and cream cheese is insane. That's fantastic. I saw the picture of that.
Also a question about any favorite foods or dishes to pair with these sakes, and maybe we can mention some with the Blue Door and then some for the ginjo when we get to it.
Yeah, so I mean, what I'd say before answering that question is the way I think about pairing is I think about the broad range of Japanese food, right? So as simple and delicate as sashimi to like as kind of savory and complex as curries, right? There's like fried foods, so tempura, there's huge meat and steak and grilled culture. So it's very easy in my mind to find analogs in American cuisine that you would think like to pair with traditional, like with Japanese, like with the spectrum of Japanese food. And so I find no problem finding matches for sake using that kind of simple logic. For the Blue Door, the first sake, because it's going to be a little meatier, a little bit more robust, have a little bit more umami or savory quality. I mean, it is a much more food-friendly sake than the ginjo, that is our second sake. And we tend to pair it with things ranging from fried foods to pastas to, I mean, you name it. I mean, I am not a som, so I tend to think about pairing in very simple terms, as in like, do I like my food? Do I like my drink? All right, they pair well together. But with sake, because of the low acidity, it really is a food-friendly addition to your meal. This sake in particular is what does really well in pairing tasting menus in New York, and that's because of that umami quality that kind of fits in well with like a more savory dish. So that's for the first. So what do people think about the first sake? Good, bad, indifferent? I mean, any notes that you're getting? I mean, I drink my Kool-Aid, so I'm a big fan, but I'm always curious for new people too.
I have a question as we're tasting, actually. If you could talk a little bit about why you choose to produce so many Nama sake. I know that, we have a lot of Nama fans in the house tonight. So I would be curious if you could talk a little bit about that, and also kind of what in the production process creates that umami, and like what is contributing to the differences in flavor, since we're working with those same four ingredients in both sake.
Yeah, those are great questions. So, I mean, I think both myself and Brandon, our brewer, when we started the company, we were like, I mean, there are fantastic sakes in Japan that you just don't have access to, and a lot of those are local, kind of unpasteurized, like super fresh sakes. And so it's like, okay, can we make that style of sake and make it as much as we can and as varied as we can? I'm a huge fan of Namazake because I think it maintains the integrity of like what comes right out of your fermentation process. And so when I want to introduce someone to sake for the first time, I want them to try something as fresh and as close to the fermentation as possible. And so that's why we make a bunch of namas. I mean, they're effervescent, they're bold, they're great mouthfeel. And even as they vary, like you see in these two sakes, they have that kind of brightness, which I'm not saying pasteurized sake loses. It's different and different form and function. So that's one kind of reason and motivation for sticking to Nama. The other is pasteurization is tough. I mean, just on a practical, from a process perspective, there's a huge learning curve associated with kind of doing pasteurization well to kind of get the best outcomes from the sake that we're making. And Brandon spends a lot of time just thinking about that. So the pasteurized sakes that we do sell are pasteurized in bottle and single pasteurized. And as we evolve and have broader reach, we're going to do more to stabilize our sake because the supply chain in the U.S. sucks for sake. And so, yeah, those are the real answers for why Nama. And then you asked a question about. Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
Real quick on pasteurization. I know you said you've been experimenting with pasteurization. Have you experimented with the Blue Door or number 14? And then have you tasted the Nama versus a pasteurized version of the same sake?
Yeah, so we have, and while it's delicious, it's not what we want. So Brandon is like actively kind of iterating through variations of these recipes. So when you make a sake that you intend to pasteurize, you make it a little differently, and you use different yeasts and kind of rice builds, at least for us, than you would a pure namazake. And so we're obsessive on the quality of what we produce, and as a result, like we're very hesitant to release anything that doesn't meet kind of the quality standard that we've set. So the reason why there's variation between these two sakes, and you can make this argument for any sake. So I mean, when we're consuming sake in the U.S., sometimes we're victims of the supply chain, and so you don't necessarily taste what the sake was like in Japan, but that's a different issue. So if you're tasting like really well controlled refrigerated sake side by side, the difference can be in the water composition, hard versus soft, right? It can be in the rice composition. So are you using sake brewer's rice or not? Like what's the protein, fat, and starch content, and what the rice build that you're using in your fermentation? Those are very important. But really, like koji and yeast are kind of the major players. You assume you have good rice and good water. Koji and yeast like drive huge variation. So in our Blue Door, the first sake that you're trying, we are making the koji slightly different so that the protease, the enzyme that actually breaks up proteins to amino acids, which are a source of umami, are more present in the final sake. So we spend more time in the koji making process at temperatures such that proteases are kind of being produced, and you get more aminos and as a result more umami from the sake. We also ferment that sake a little faster, which kind of subdues aromatics and adds this texture and kind of heat almost to it. And then yeast is like really kind of, and I mean, I'm not I mean, I know a lot about sake making, but I'm not like a wine expert or beer expert. In beer, we talk a lot about yeast. In wine, really not at all, unless it's ambient, right? And then that's not really talking about it. It's just saying kind of generally that it's ambient. In sake making, they don't talk a lot about yeast, but in the brewer's world, yeast is discussed quite a bit. And so for the junmai, with the goal of more subdued aromatics and more texture and umami, the blend of yeast that are used kind of are what are the final touch, the most superficial component of the experience of tree cake sake, which can have the largest impact. I don't know, Courtney, did that answer your question?
No, yeah, absolutely. Actually did a sake school themed around yeast a couple of weeks ago where we tasted 3 different sakes with 3 different yeasts, and it was really interesting to taste them all side by side and really kind of go deep. And I think I agree with you 100%. It's a topic that isn't discussed that often, but it has such an impact on the drinking experience with sake.
Yeah, oh, awesome.
So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. So what is my favorite brewery? Is that where we are on the question? What is my favorite brewery? Do you distribute your sakes outside the US? How many times? Okay, all right. Where are we? And I'll go through these questions really quickly.
How long does it take to brew number 14 versus Blue Door?
So number 14, soup to nuts, is about a 45-day process, all right, into bottle. And the Blue Door is probably like a 35-day process. So fermentation time is about 10 days longer, and that's really because we make the yeast work a lot harder in the number 14 to get some of those aromatics that we're going for. Yeah. So okay, go for it, Jesse.
You distribute your sakes outside of the U.S.? I can say yes, I've seen them in Japan.
Yeah, so people, I mean, it's been surreal. People definitely take our sakes to Japan. We do distribute, and we have in partnership with Brooklyn Brewery to Hong Kong. And there's some great places like Sake Central, et cetera, but that's relatively small volumes. And then Japan, the reverse distribution to Japan is very likely. It's just right now COVID has created some challenges, so as it has for most of us. And so it's kind of on hold until like the world stabilizes. We'll be in Berlin. Richie Houghton, who is a kind of a pretty big name in electronic music, is a sake lover and owns this really beautiful brand of sake and called Enter Sake, which works with some talented breweries across Japan. And he has this new retail in Berlin, and so we're gonna kind of put our sake there as well, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. How many types of rice did you try before arriving at Calrose?
It's a good question. So we tried quite a bit, but I mean, Calrose makes good sake. I mean, as long as you have a controlled process that's clean with cold, like the ability to maintain cold temperatures with high quality water and yeast, you can make delicious sake with Calrose. Calrose is kind of ubiquitous in the US, and because the sake industry in the US is dominated by Japanese producers, those producers are based in California and have invested in infrastructure to grow and mill Calrose for the purpose of sake production. I mean, Calrose was an easy option for us, and it yielded very good quality results. Now, we augment the Calrose in the 2 sakes that you have in front of you, and in 99% of the sake we make, by making the koji, right, that kind of source of sugar for the fermentation, using Yamada Nishiki. And Yamada Nishiki is a sake brewer's rice, and we do that because that further boosts the quality of our sake, even though it changes the economics of it. And Yamada is starting to be grown more in California and Arkansas, and at a very high quality. So hopefully that answers your question.
Let's see here. Do you brew year round, or is it more like once a year?
Oh no, we brew year round. Yeah. I'd like to brew 24 hours a day, but we don't. So no, we technically do, because the tanks are bubbling. But yeah, we brew year.
I have a comment. Love punchy umami sakes, and the Blue Door hits home, picking up earthy mushroom notes and some pepper or spice. going to drink this with barbecue, which I definitely agree on. Like, you get those umami notes, and they love that like char off the grill, anything with like that caramelization. Let's see, we have another one. Do you plan to make a nigori? And do you use a higher percentage of refined rice for different sakes?
So we do. I mean, we follow the classic definitions from Japan. So we maintain more than 15% of koji as a part of the total rice in our product. We use those 4 ingredients that we described. Yeah, so I mean, for our daiginjos, it's all Yamada, and the rice is milled more than 50%. For our ginjo, our rice is milled more than 60%. For our blue door, which is a junmai, it's more of a tokubetsu junmai, which means that, I mean, it means a couple of different things, or can mean a couple of different things. In our instance, we are using rice that's milled more than 60% to kind of be able to make that designation. Yeah.
I think we may have missed a question too. Did you see this? What is your favorite brewery in Japan, and who is your inspiration for sake brewing?
My inspiration is my wife. She's, no, I'm just you never know if she's listening, so she might be. So my favorite brewery in Japan, that's tough. I mean, I have so many fantastic breweries. I mean, I love like, I love classic sakes, classic ginjo sakes in many respects, which are different than the sakes we make, but like Hakai-san, I love, right? I love anything that Masumi makes, Miyasaka Shuzo. I mean, these are just like lovely, they're like, almost like water imbued with alcohol after a very delicate fermentation process. And then, I mean, yeah, I think those are 2 that stand out. Namubijin I love a lot, and I'm talking mostly about partners. Senkin I love. I mean, there's just so many great breweries out there. It's hard to name them all. When we go to Japan, I mean, we're pretty fortunate in that we get to visit a lot of these places and drink some of their best sakes. And so, I mean, I really haven't met a sake made with care and like the craftsmanship that you come to expect out of Japanese producers that I didn't enjoy, right? I tend to prefer cold sake. I mean, kansake, hot sake has a role, but I think it kind of confuses the message a little bit. And I think so that's kind of where I err. But you go to Japan, it's amazing how varied and wonderful the sake is, and how high integrity the pricing is. You pretty much pay for what you get, which is great.
Generally speaking, are more floral or aromatic sakes brewed at lower temps, or is that factor really just varied by yeast strain?
Actually, that's a great question. So, I mean, those are 2 factors in the equation, but in general, to get that kind of aromatic, delicate floral quality, you need to do low temperature fermentation, right? That's sorry, someone knocked on the window. And yeah, so the answer is yes, low temperature matters. Of course, some yeasts kind of yield these really fruity floral esters, and if you choose a yeast that doesn't do that, then it doesn't matter how low the temperature is. But in general, you're absolutely correct.
For Blue Door, why do you decide to consider it Tokubetsu Junmai rather than Junmai Ginjo?
I think because the style, we wanted to be more savory and subdued aromatics, and the kind of treatment of it, we want it to be more Junmai style, and that's why. And I mean, they're priced the same. The rice composition, I mean, it's probably, but yeah, really, we wanted it to be Junmai style in terms of the goal.
Yeah, because you see some crossover as far as, you know, Junmai and Ginjo being, you know, terms used by the brewers as far as, you know, how far the rice is polished, but those are only minimums. So like you're saying, Junmai as a style is usually maybe a little bit more earthy. Ginjo is usually a little bit more fruity.
Exactly.
So you don't want people buying Blue Door thinking it's going to be super fruity.
Yeah, exactly. and we want there to be a material difference between what you buy and taste from us, right? So that you can experience a range of sake that even a small brewery like we can produce, which hopefully is delicious, because our intent is really to do something that like we're proud of and that you guys will enjoy.
Any questions on Blue Door before we move to number 14? Feel free to submit them if they are. Otherwise, let's get into some ginjo.
Yeah, let's do it. So the ginjo, I mean, it's called number 14 because it's essentially a version of the 14th recipe that we developed in our laboratory space. That's hilarious. Someone just said there's nothing left, so they don't have any 14 to drink. It makes me smile. So it's an iteration of the 14th recipe that we made in this like old Pfizer facility in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which was fucking bizarre world, but wonderful. The goal. So the ginjo, this sake is our top selling sake. It's kind of like in every, or if not most accounts that we have. It's kind of a good entry level sake in that it's light, floral, drinkable. As far as pairings concerned, I mean, I drink this sake with everything. Is it as food friendly as the Blue Door? No, but it's just like this light, refreshing, drinkable thing. That when people walk in here and they're like, I don't know sake and I've only had bad experiences with it, you pour them a glass of this and they're like, holy shit, I mean, I could do this. And then you work from there. I mean, it's low acidity. And it's really just meant to be bright and delicious. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I've had that number 14 with a pop-up we did with a Kroneberger, which he serves like these dry-aged beef burgers. They're really funky, really umami-driven. It's really heavy. And I thought it was going to waste the number 14, but it actually stood up so well. So I encourage you guys, if you have some food in your fridge, throw it at this sake, because while it's a little bit more delicate than the Junmai, it's still amazing at how well it handles food.
Give me 1 second, guys. Hold on 1 second.
And Courtney, I'm curious, any tasting notes for you?
No, I was just thinking actually about how it's really cool that these sakes are on draft. I don't know if I made this clear. I don't think I did at all, but actually these are keg sakes. So we got a couple big kegs in. These are super, super fresh. We have some left over. We're going to do some growlers probably in the next couple weeks as well, or maybe some small versions of them. But it keeps the freshness so well. I was really worried about how they were going to hold up, but they're tasting delicious.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, generally, so one of the things, even in our tap room, is we want to remove any of the obstacles people traditionally have with drinking sake. So whether that's like, you don't need ceramic vessels, you can have them. You don't need them. Should I drink my sake in my wine glasses because I want to treat it like wine? I want to move it, smell it, taste it, let it rest, bring it to different temperatures. And so I don't want people walking into a retail shop and saying, that bottle looks interesting and I've heard about it, but I don't have tiny ceramic vessels at home and I can't buy it. Little things like that, I think, remove the obstacles. And once you start drinking sake, I mean, for me, it became like an excuse to quit my job and start a company. But it's pretty easy to transition away from other things because of just how interesting culturally it is, socially it is, and how wonderful a product it is. Jesse, you have a wolf behind you. Are you?
That's our Siberian Husky.
That's awesome.
She's a super taster. She actually used to drink sake a little bit. Now she only drinks beer.
Oh, nice.
She'd always come up and sniff and have a little taste of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I see some people are commenting on the miso cream cheese, which is a classic like sake tasting snack in Japan, cream cheese misozuke. So we basically took Philadelphia cream cheese and wrapped it in cheesecloth and put it in some miso and left it there for a couple days. So we have a little bit more. If anybody wants some, let me know. But it's also like, even like a little bit on your chopsticks as you're tasting the sake is super delicious. Oh, I'm glad everybody's enjoying the food. That makes me happy to hear.
So there's a question about Brooklyn Court does not ship to California. So I don't ship to California right now because directly because the state is not allowing me to. So I'm trying to figure out how to get through that barrier. But we do have sake. So Jesse is our primary point of contact and like our representation in California. And we're in a bunch of exciting retailers that like he can list off maybe in the chat. And then places like with Courtney that like keep us present. So you can always go visit Courtney and get some sake too. Are you doing to go? Are you doing retail? Can you do that in California, Courtney?
We can.
Yeah.
They loosen the restrictions just like in New York. So we're doing bottles to go. We're gonna. I think you stepped away, but we're gonna do growlers of what's left in the kegs. I think because we still have a little bit left, and yeah, I mean, it's yeah, we're doing to go food and to go sake as I think most folks are aware of. But yeah, I mean, if you have, we were talking earlier, I think before we started the public chat about doing some, maybe getting some of the more specialty items in from Brooklyn Kura as well, some of the more limited edition sake. So if anyone's interested, please let us know. We can do our best. I know, Brian, you were saying you have a bunch of kind of fun stuff that's not
Yeah.
in LA right now, but maybe we could find
Yeah.
it here.
We'll have the rosé in about 2 weeks.
Awesome. These are delicious. Oh, thank you, Jess Hong. Yeah, that's really, I mean, I could talk a long time, but I can't see anyone's face except for Courtney's and Jesse's, so it makes it a little awkward. But so rosé sake is a question. Actually, so we make very traditional style sakes, but we made a sake and we make it maybe like once or twice a year. That after making a beautiful junmai or ginjo, this most recent is a junmai. We lightly or gently dry hop it. And what happens is like we want to extract the aromatics, but maintain the integrity of the sake on the palate. And so we did that. And when you do that, like the resulting product is this very light, kind of pale, not green, but like reflects light in a green color. And then after like a month in the bottle, it starts to change color as if it's like the turning of the seasons. And we think what's happening is the hops that the residual hops, even though we filter it out to very small micron level, are oxidizing because of the oxygen in solution in the sake and like turning pink. And so the sake itself is a light pink, which I mean, I kind of shudder at the idea of a rosé sake just in general, but like this is like, it's beautiful and it pours really well, smells really good and tastes wonderful. So, so here's a bottle of it. This is what the bottle looks like, which is kind of, and we call it Occidental, which effectively means Western. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So if you guys have any other questions, hit us up.
I think there's one more. For my palate, these are earthy and would want to pair with food, which is great. Are you producing anything sweeter and delicate?
Yeah, so I think what you get out of single pasteurization is a little bit more focused and delicate outcome. The Nama has a little bit more texture to it. So our daiginjos, I would highly recommend. When I think sweeter, I mean, our sakes tend to be, I mean, on the drier side of the spectrum. But yeah, if you can get a hold of one of our daiginjos, I think you'd be really happy. And it definitely airs on that side.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. I think unless anybody has any further questions, maybe we can wrap things up soon-ish. Taste some or drink some sake now that we're winding down. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. It's late in New York too, I know. So thanks for doing this at 9 o'clock on a Sunday.
My wife got to put the kids to bed. I am gladly here. Thank you guys so much. Seriously, Jesse, Courtney, and everyone. It's a pleasure meeting you virtually. Hopefully we'll see you at the brewery. And if you ever have any feedback or commentary on our sake, you can reach out directly to me at brian@brooklynkura.com or to Courtney or Jesse. I mean, and I'm sure I'll get the feedback positive. I'm sure it will be. So I thank you guys for this opportunity. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Like, goodbye.